Well, folks, Milo Yiannopoulos is broke. At least according to Vox, he's broke, and the title of this video. But I think the recent article by Vice that covers the story of Milo Yiannopoulos' brokenness is indeed accurate. There's quite a few screenshots of Telegram messages. Nothing like screenshotting has-been minor political figures for your story to really make you feel like you're living a fulfilling career. Now, granted, you might say I'm screenshotting the screenshots, and my response to that is, well, let's focus on the material and what I want to analyze here. Because this article, this Vice, they're all the same these days. This Vice article does a good job illustrating a question I had for a long time before I really got into media, which is, why do certain narratives pick up traction over other ones? Especially if you're there in a specific scene or have a specific knowledge in a localized domain field, and you read something in the paper and you might think to yourself, well, I'm actually an expert in this and they don't really have it right. Or I was at that event and it's not exactly what happened to, Miss Crabapple. Well, if you have that experience, if you've ever had that experience reading a piece of media or news content, this is a good illustration of how certain narratives win over others. So within this larger Vice, not Vox article, gotta be careful here. Within this larger Vice article, there's two paragraphs that I wanna read and pull out a little bit. So the author, which it doesn't matter what his name is, the author writes, "The rant," he's referring to Milo Yiannopoulos' Telegram messages here to his 2,000 followers, "the rant offers some hope to progressive activists who pushed tech companies to take a harder line against users who traffic in hate speech." This line to me is in particular interesting because, maybe it's just me personally, but I seem to recall quite a few conservative or right-leaning figures really want to see regulations put on digital media platforms like Facebook and Instagram as well. So it's not as if progressive activists had the sole vice grip on, vice, no pun intended, vice grip on wanting further regulations on media companies. Anyway, we're going to focus on progressives, I guess, according to this writer. The rant offers some hope to progressive activists who hope to take a harder line against users who traffic in hate speech. A gaggle of right-wing commentators turn such incendiary content into cold, hard cash, parlaying engaged social media audiences into speaking gigs, book deals, or direct contributions from fans through services like Patreon. It's a good sentence, a fine sentence, if a bit wordy. And it's the words, the devil in the details, that can mislead narratives over time. And we're going to get to the second paragraph, which is what I'm really talking about here. But for instance, into book deals or direct contributions from fans through services like Patreon, you could have collapsed that sentence to direct contributions from Patreon. We all know what he's talking about. But perhaps the author likes to see his word on the written page here. Second paragraph. Efforts to regulate the cottage industry have backfired in some cases. In June, YouTube's bungled demonetization of a channel run by the conservative comedian Steven Crowder, who obsessively bullied Vox journalist Carlos Maza, drew calls of censorship from across right-wing political media. So here's what I really want to focus in. So we talked about that Steven Crowder-Carlos Maza controversy, and each side had a couple fair, honest points to be had. But our writer here at Vice recalls the story as such, that a channel run by a conservative comedian obsessively bullied Vox journalist Carlos Maza. So I'm really curious about the adverb obsessively and the verb bullied. These two really, I think, switch or realign the narrative early on when a controversy, like let's take the Steven Crowder and Carlos Maza controversy, there's two opposing viewpoints, a bunch of different stories get written about it, and each journalist or writer lays down a railroad track of a narrative. And that's the first draft. And then over time, as future writers and journalists want to rehash the story or call reference to it, those are the ones that choose which path to retrace over and over again. And it's tracing those groove lines as we go along that solidifies what the prevailing narrative is going to be. And so already we can see here that I think the prevailing narrative of what occurred between the Carlos Mazda Steven Crowder controversy is that Steven Crowder obsessively bullied Vox journalist Carlos Mazda. Now, obsessive is an interesting word to me because it implies a constant and continualness to his actions, which any observer must admit, I think it's fair to say, it was not obsessive in any meaningful way. Crowder went after many public figures, and the derogatory comments he made towards Carlos were not obsessive. There were maybe more than a handful, but not more than a dozen. It was a moderate amount over years, 2 or 3 years time period. It's not entirely obsessive. Nonetheless, I find the adverb obsessive interesting, and then bullied equally as interesting to paint the narrative that we're conjuring in the reader's head here. So bullied, why bullied? Why bullied over mocked? Mocked seems like a better word if you're going to use the descriptor of a comedian for Steven Crowder. When comedians mock, comedians don't really bully. But you're going to use the word bully, which once again implies an unfair advantage against Carlos Mazda. I think mocked would be a more accurate representation of a fair adjudication of the situation. Without a doubt, Steven Crowder certainly mocked Carlos Mazda. Now, you may feel that it was wrong to do so, or you may think it was frivolous. It doesn't matter. I think mocked is the more accurate descriptive term. Nonetheless, our writer chooses to go with obsessively bullied. And by going with obsessively bullied, we've slightly changed the narrative of what occurred there. We've slightly rewritten history. We've laid down another trace line along a specific narrative that occurs. And this is really, I think, where small initial changes can lead to large, different outcomes in the long term. And so small initial changes like obsessively, like bullied, using these descriptors can over time radically alter the collective perception of what occurred there. And this article, I think, does a good job of highlighting how when we recall events in the past, the words we use to describe them can shape how they're then perceived in the future. Curious to see what you guys think. Regarding Milo Yiannopoulos being broke and poor, I think he is definitely indeed broke. My own personal opinion on it as well. What's the proverb? You know, do not rejoice when your enemy fails. Do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. There's some truth to that. Don't rejoice. It's not we shouldn't revel, and liberals or anybody who didn't like Milo shouldn't revel in his destituteness. Nonetheless, I think at this point, the math maketh the man, and the math in his bank account should surely suggest he should get a job. If I was Milo, I'd be working at Walgreens at this point, for goodness sakes. Like, get a job. If you can't support yourself being a political commentator, get a job working at Subway. Simple as that. So my pity only extends so far to a man who made his name as a provocateur and antagonizer of other individuals that then wants to reap the self-pity a few years later. The Milo Yiannopoulos is really second fiddle to, once again, what I'm more interested in, what I think is ultimately the more interesting question, which is the mechanics of how narratives get constructed. And here we can see, although it seems to be just a skirmish in the larger article itself, that the skirmish has in it the makings of revisionist history, a slightly revisionist take on what occurred and what we all witnessed a few months ago between Carlos Mazda and Steven Crowder. Anyway, that's all for this morning. Let me know what you guys think, if you found this interesting or insightful, if you're wondering why I drew your eye to such an obscure publication, a little drivel. This is the reason why. I find it fascinating to see how the means operate more than the ends. I'm endlessly fascinated in the means more than the ends. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, click another video if you want. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.